Welcome. I hope lunch was great. My name is John DeWyze. I work at Shopify, and I'm here today to talk about trust. So, do you trust me? I actually already know you might trust me a little. Maybe not directly. We've never talked, but either through the fact that the RailsConf committee chose this talk, or maybe that I work at Shopify and you think they're cool, or maybe the bare minimum that you trust this is a better way to spend the next 30 minutes than doing nothing. Which is impressive because it's gorgeous outside, so I appreciate that. So who am I? My name is John DeWyze. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a staff developer at Shopify. I'm from the Chicago area, suburbs, then city. I'm back to the suburbs. Been a developer for 8 years after a complete career change. I care a lot about healthy teams and the people side of development, but I've always enjoyed doing that as a technical role and not as a manager. I'm also a dad of 2 with 1 on the way. I love card games, especially bridge. Does anybody here play bridge? Oh my gosh, 6 is actually a lot. So that's really cool. I love bread and making bread and pizza and getting kind of into woodworking. So if any of those things interest you, I'm happy to just talk to you about that. Before we jump in though, a few caveats. If I ask for people to raise their hand, you don't have to if that's not your thing. Don't care. Thank you. You can leave. If you want to leave before Q&A, I do ask, please leave quickly and quietly so people that want to stay can listen and don't have to deal with the rustling, but go. You don't have to feel like you're stuck here. Additionally, if you want to leave during the talk for an emergency or you want some water or you're bored because this isn't your thing, that's fine. Please just be quiet. If I say something ignorant, harmful, wrong, offensive, please let me know. My email's at the end. You can come find me after the talk. I'm always looking to grow and fill in my gaps as a developer, speaker, just human being. I'm not a psychologist. I'm talking about trust, but I'm a developer. I'm married to a therapist. I don't know if I get any creds for that, but I just care about this. So for better or worse, a lot of us talk about these things because we care, but don't take my word as gospel. This talk is kind of team and company focused because we're talking about trust. It doesn't quite matter as much as an individual, but whether we trust ourselves is a thing. So if you're kind of a solo developer, this might not apply to your daily life, but one day I hope that if you're on a team that's helpful. A lot of my sort of outside data comes from something called the Truth Project, which is a large project out of Northwestern University. It's cross-disciplinary. It comes in many forms of life, relationships, business, teams, organizations, governments, finance, bioethics, all sorts of stuff. And they have some really interesting stuff around trust globally and cultures with high or low trust in individuals or high or low trust in systems and institutions. That being said, it does seem to have a Western focus, so take that for what it's worth if you're on global teams. Do check it out though. It's a bunch of bite-sized 4 to 7 minute videos that you can watch at any time. It's really cool. All right, so what are today's goals? We're going to talk about systems of trust in our companies and our world. We're also going to talk about trust rituals on our teams. We're going to talk about the relationship between trust and time. We're going to talk about the psychology of trust. What is it? We'll do that later because we all kind of have a working definition, but we got to get into it. We're going to talk about what are the benefits? Why do we use this lens? And finally, we're going to talk about practically building and maintaining trust on our teams. So I'm not sure if this is the right term, a system of trust, but I'm going to use it. It describes the things that are sort of more institutional in nature, slower to change, but are meant to be really reliable or at least consistent. We have these because taking time to trust every single person we encounter in a culture, in a group, on a team is hard. So we rely on systems to remove that burden. We don't have to know people or like them necessarily to trust them, or to trust that working with them is going to turn out okay. There are a lot of things that contribute to how we trust, when, why, but I want to call out a few. Culture, the world, whatever you want to call it, we have different norms that determine how we trust. In cultures with expected, followed social norms, we don't actually need to trust people as much because we can trust the system. Let's say you're in a country that really respects lines, queues, waiting in line. You know that line jumpers are going to be mercilessly shamed if they try to cut in front of you. So I don't got to worry about it. Or it's just a general flow of people and the specific order doesn't matter. Maybe your community has different expectations on how old children have to be to play alone at a park. Or are stoplights optional? Or who has the right of way? Who controls the streets, pedestrians or cars? That is not universal across the world. And whatever culture, place you're in, you start to develop a trust for that system, an understanding of it. There's also our experience. We could get into things like attachment theory, which is, when we're really young, our first relationship is with our parents. Maybe good or bad, but we learn about, can we even trust the world if we can trust our first relationships? Also, maybe in our jobs, we've noticed that our experiences, the most skilled, collaborative, great teammates are the ones that get promotions. And we really trust the hierarchy. We trust promotions. Or maybe it's the loudest people that aren't qualified. And so we don't trust that system. Our own experience will inform this. Then there's things like contracts, which with a contract, and this is prominent in some cultures, I don't have to trust you at all because there's this, in theory, legal enforcement of how our interactions were going to go. If you break the contract, either you'll get in trouble or I'll be compensated. So that's a way for us to not have to worry about our trust as individuals because we put this onto a system, an object, whatever you want to call it, to help us. We also have things like titles and certifications. Again, in theory, if a person has a title or certification, accreditation, we trust they're qualified to do the thing they say. I didn't research whether or not they are, but they have that thing. So let's take something like an electrician. They have some sort of certification, part of a union. We know that they know how to work with electricity. We don't know if they're better than others, but we have some trust of that basic ability. Now, we may not trust whether or not they're going to give us a fair price, whether they're going to tell us what's really wrong, but we do trust their ability to work with the wires, to not hurt themselves, stuff like that. But then when we're trying to figure out the other side of it, is this price fair? We also then reach into our web of trust, kind of like the Linux systems or GPG encryption. We go to Yelp. That's our universal web of trust. Does this person have 1,000 good reviews? I don't have any other way of knowing, so I'll take that. But then we also have different levels of trust. If my best friend says I can trust someone, I don't care what Yelp says. I'm going to follow that. So all these things exist, and they inform how we trust within a system, what we take for granted, what we assume. There's also internal systems of trust. Internal, in this case, to a company. We have things like teams, that we trust a group of people comprised against some standard of quantity, skill, etc., to do a thing, to become subject matter experts, to ship some code. We have managers. Now, it's not an official thing, but I like to think of managers as defenders of trust. They decide maybe who gets free trust in terms of titles, promotions. They defend our rituals, that all the things we do as a team, that they're the ones that make sure these things stay there. Hopefully they're defending us from other people interfering with our team. Maybe you have tech leads. So these are somewhat like builders and maintainers of trust. They're responsible for some of the extra checks we put on our technologies. Determining is enough systemic trust via CI, whatever, present or not for a given action. And then there's all of us, maybe. Of course, there's people besides managers and tech leads that do this, and some companies, that's normal and encouraged, that everyone can make a change and can grow and can contribute to the system. At other companies, that might not be so true. And both of these, that can grow or erode over time. Our personal interactions, company culture, can make it so a title, tech lead, manager, whatever, becomes actually really meaningful or becomes empty. So those are systems of trust. So far, so good. Now let's talk about trust rituals, a term that I completely made up. So what are they? So we're going to talk about things like PRs, tests, etc., as trust rituals. Now you may not think of these things as trust exercises, but I would argue otherwise. Building trust, again, takes time. We do a lot of things so we don't have to fully know and trust every person on our team. We do these things to save ourselves a lot of time. It still requires trust, though. We let these systems take the burden of building that trust every day. And we put our trust into the systems, tangible, intangible. And that's why a lot of times when the systems don't work, we get frustrated because the system broke down. Who do we blame? The system. Well, we need the system. Maybe. Do we? But nevertheless, these things end up being trust rituals. We rely on them. These are things that we're going to outsource at a local level. So again, building trust is hard and time-consuming. And so if we can put it into things that are reliable, or again, consistent, we can spend less time building it. Now, this is not a criticism. If we had to trust every single person on our team and every person in our company 100%, we'd never get anything done. It takes a lifetime. We have friendships that grow and erode and change in trust, and so that's not efficient. We need better ways to handle it. Offloading trust to these rituals and systems is normal and good as long as we do it right. So let's talk about pull requests. How do these build or maintain trust? So instead of domain experts needing to check every single line of code as it's being written, which we all know, half the time we write the code, erase it, write it, erase it, we don't need to check that whole time. We're going to check at the end. We're going to trust that the process of getting there was good and timely. We can also then check as a group. So we don't need to have all 4 to 8 to 12 team members present during the writing of every bit of code. So we can trust that this collective knowledge of the team is still going to get applied to what we're shipping, even though it's not applied throughout the whole process. It's a way to share knowledge. We trust that our team members are going to get better by looking at each other's code. How else would they get better? It's another thing that we assume that this is going to help us get better implicitly by understanding that without having to do formal mentoring, although we do need to do that. Also, it's a way to address edge cases. We all know that there are people that have seen some stuff, and they're the ones that really need to sometimes take a look at our code. They need to know, I know you think this is going to work, but it's not. Just trust me. And that's okay that we have these systems like pull requests in place to help us not have to worry about this the whole time we're writing code. We can check at the end. We can check together. But why do we do this? What's the meta reason? Usually we have some sort of product we're selling. And our teammates getting better, all of us getting better, while it's a good thing and noble, is not usually in itself our goal. We want to make a better product. And bad code is going to cost us money. It'll also breed what are called trust violations. And we'll talk more about that specifically, but you can guess what it means. Our customers will have an expectation that wasn't met, downtime, a bug, and they will start to not trust us. And they'll be weary of whether they can continue to trust us. Is our system going to stay up? How many nines? How many bugs? How much money do I lose? How many customers do I lose as a customer of them? Bugs will also cost us time to fix. Time which could be used instead to build new features. Or time which could be used to fix other bugs that cause us time. Tests, another trust ritual, at least in Ruby land. We use this as our documentation. It prevents regressions. Those would cause trust violations and cost us more money. Now, realistically, to a point, our customers losing money or us losing money might not actually be the problem, so much as losing trust means they're not going to continue to work with us or give us money. So if we lost a customer a bunch of money, customers, whatever, but they didn't care, would we care? We care about the expectations that have been set forth and are expected. If someone doesn't have expectations about money, we have assurance that that's not going to be the reason they leave. Our business model would adapt to that. Trust is formed around whatever these shared expectations are. What are some other rituals? Things like CI. I don't need to test all the code in the whole code base or interactions with other code. If I had to do that every time I wrote code, it would take forever. I write code knowing this stuff will be caught later. Pairing is another way we trust that the time investment is going to be valuable ultimately to the company. 2 people working on one code at once, that can't be effective, but those who have done it know it really produces a lot of results, more than just working alone. Type systems, if you use sorbet or you're from another language, we can just know that we can trust the compiler to tell us if we've done something wrong. Rubocop. This prevents the trust of writing code that later on will cause mental overhead. What is this doing again? I thought we did this the other way. It also will prevent a lot of bike shedding. It is, in a weird way, it's a trust ritual. It's a trust that I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to care about the style because something else is going to do it for me. Code coverage. I don't have to worry if every code is tested. You still might in pull requests on your team, but you're going to trust across the board that's not happening. Design patterns. You could think of Rails itself or any of the gems from DryRB. These are things that we trust that things are going to be done the same way every time. I don't have to learn how to use a server when I'm writing Rails code because the server stuff's underneath, everyone's going to reuse it. People don't write different styles of controllers every single time. Jira, Trello, all those things. It's an organizational level trust ritual that we don't need to know what's going on across the organization all the time. So those are trust rituals, assuming you're still with me on that one. But it's not enough. We have these things, but we always add more. So first time to raise your hands. Does anybody ever have the experience of a PR exhaustion cycle where for every 6 to 8 months, people are like, ugh, I'm not getting reviews, they're taking so long. Does anyone ever have that experience? A lot of people. And it happens like clockwork. And sometimes then we're like, okay, we'll add a new system. You need 3 reviews and you need to leave an emoji, or no one has to do a PR review, or the first hour of every day, or something. We'll add more things because people don't trust the system. But why do we even do that? Why do we add more rituals? Like, what is it we're trying to get at? Well, systems are consistent in theory. People are fallible, and it's not fun to blame them, so we really don't want to do it. Someone might be having a bad day or a bad week, or someone's maybe not a great teammate. And we want to have some systems to help us like kind of shore up, or have some trust rituals to help us shore up our systems. But I think most importantly, it's time. All these things are trying to save time. This is my most visually offensive slide. Trust and time and time and trust and trust and time and time and trust. We have these rituals and these systems to prevent further trust violations to save us time. Because we need that time to add features and prevent further violations to save us time. We don't want our customers to lose trust in us. But if these rituals are meant to build a system of trust, and we find those rituals annoying, i.e. we don't trust them, we start to erode the entire system we've constructed. Additionally, for our own personal careers, building trust takes time. For promotions and career growth, I want to know that I'm kind of on my way to something more. And if I have all these systems to help me, they're saving me time. If you're someone from an underrepresented group in tech, all the more. Trust violations cost you more. Time is so much more precious because you might not be on teams where you get enough to really make a dent. Time. It's so important. Rituals save us time, and violations cost us time. So that's trust and time. But what is trust? Halfway through the talk, let's talk about that. So we've talked about systems and trust that we use in our work. And I've been sort of relying on the assumed definition of trust. I want to ultimately talk about building trust in our rituals and our systems, but first, we should talk about what this is. So what is trust? So again, when I use the trust project, there's a lot of definitions, but I've sort of mixed and mashed them together to get the best consensus I could. Trust is about the relationship to the other. That could be a person, it could be a system. It's also a reliance specifically that can breed betrayal or camaraderie. So what does that mean? My toaster, for example. If it breaks, I do not feel a sense of betrayal. I wanted it to be reliable, but I have other ways to cook bread. But my car is a little different. If my car breaks down when I'm supposed to pick up my kids before a job interview, that's actually a problem. We actually put trust in our cars, which I think is reasonable, and not in our toasters. It's that sense of betrayal that kind of helps us determine when something is trust and when something is just reliance expectations. What are the components then of trust? So there were 2 parts of trust that were across every definition in that trust project, and some others that were across most. So let's talk about those 2 first. Predictability. So that is, a thing or a person is predictable. It behaves the same way every time. It's the friend who's always there for you. But not only behaves the same way, but does so in an adequate, competent manner. So the friend who gives great advice. Now, you might have a friend who's always there and one who gives great advice, but they might not be the same person. So you have some trust, but it's not complete. There were 2 other components that I think were worth mentioning. One is integrity, which is that you're going to do what you say. And this is slightly different from reliable in that you might say you're going to do something, but I know you only do it half the time. So you are reliably unreliant. I can't trust that you're going to do what you say, but I can trust that you're going to be inconsistent. There's also benevolence, which is that you're nice or kind. And you can actually have integrity without benevolence. So we could say that maybe there's honor amongst thieves. Maybe we're all the baddies, but we're in it together. So we have integrity, but not benevolence. There's also something called trust violations. And there's 2 primary categories of those. Integrity. So this is when you violate predictability and integrity as a component, usually via a choice. And this choice represents malice or maybe loyalty or selfishness. So an example of an integrity violation would be lying about something being done or not being done, or taking credit for something someone else did. Then there's competence violations. This is you failed to do something because you weren't able. So you could think of sort of any team analogy, sports, video games, debate. Someone tried but did a bad job. So how do we repair violations? Well, when you deal with competency violations, apologies are usually sufficient. There's an admission of a failure to follow through or a failure to do it well. Even with repeated competency violations, we tend to forgive quickly as long as there's improvement. We may change the way we do stuff or not put that person in a critical role, but we're willing to let them move back into the team and continue to grow and maybe go back into that critical role. But with integrity violations, are apologies enough? You can apologize, but if your integrity is in question, can I believe your apology? Or you can improve. But if your integrity is in question, can I trust that you're improving for the right reasons? Integrity violations are hard to rebuild. They take apologies and increase in competence, but they also take a genuine sense of humility. Because it's sort of a failure of human competency. That's what an integrity violation is, when we fail to be competent at being a good person. To repair these, it takes a bit of humility, it takes time, it takes a lot of things. Now, I'm not going to get into this entirely now because it's a deep topic, and I'm pretty sure in our culture now you can hire people to teach you how to apologize, so you can always do that. But this is actually a deep topic that I do encourage you to think about in your own teams of how we encourage a culture that makes it able for someone to either not have an integrity violation or move back into the sense of a team. I also want to talk about repairing systemic violations. So systems of trust, how do we repair those? Repairing trust is actually a lot harder than inheriting it. So if you walk into a trusted position at a company, just make sure you don't lose it. If you walk into a bad situation though, you actually have a lot to do before you can really get anything done. Leaders also have a bias for action, that we can add trust, build trust by doing more things, that we can fix by doing. But really, in order for action to matter, we have to address trust deficits first, the things that have been caused by the violations. So there's this story I saw in these trust project videos about this guy who ran the Campbell Soup Company, Doug Conant. Took over when the company was the worst score for trust in the company of any Fortune 500. They did a survey and it was just absolutely terrible. And they came up with sort of an overarching mission statement for their improvement, which was Campbell valuing people and people valuing Campbell. The order of that is important. He noticed that when you have deficits, no one is going to care about making Campbell Soup better if they don't feel that Campbell Soup is taking care of its employees. The company had to show they cared first. I care about your values, so then you can care about mine. And that's a really important thing when you're in sort of a working relationship between the company, between the team and its members. We care about the individuals, and then they can care about our shared goals. He also did something really interesting. One of the things he did, he would go around to employees every day and hand out Post-its of a tangible thing that they did. Not a rote, great job, but he saw them do something, and he would hand out Post-its to give it to the employee. And he said over several years, he put out 10,000 of these to various employees. And that subtle thing from the CEO was one of the many things they did to really kind of build up trust that, hey, this is actually being noticed and valued. All right, that emoji did not form. I'm missing a colon. All right, so what are the benefits of trust? We keep talking about this because trust systems, rituals have a lot of benefits. We're going to talk about that, but first, I want to share some things heard around the office. So I'm going to share a series of quotes. I've heard all these things in my career. I think they are simultaneously caricatures of different stages of our career, and I'm ambivalent about them, but I think they're good and bad and worth hearing. The veteran will say, when we first started, we used to pair and commit to master or main. Has anyone heard this before? I hear some laughing. I'll take the laughter as a hand raise. I've heard multiple senior engineers at multiple companies on multiple teams say this, which is why I find it fascinating. I think we could all relate. If we were on a team that started a company and we were building the product and it was exciting, and we were moving fast, and then we grow and things have to slow down, we might yearn for how it used to be. I remember when I was recently wizened, when I had learned something new, everyone, if we just use this design pattern, all the problems are going to go away, I promise. Has anybody heard that one? Yeah. This is from people recently growing in knowledge, leadership, they want to try things out. Or from the junior dev, or anyone, or me last week. Can I get just one more set of eyes on this pull request? Anybody? Yeah? Sometimes it's actually our expertise that tells us we need another set of eyes. Sometimes it's our fear. Sometimes we're just having an off week and could use some support. How about let's use Sorbet or TypeScript or Rust? It's always Rust from the enthusiast. Or the process weary. We don't need more processes. We just need to trust each other, whatever that means. Or from the bug weary. Unless we hire only super senior, 10x ninja engineers, we need systems in place. Or just ship it from that person. And that's not bad, because sometimes we all feel like this. Like, I'm sick of going through all these hoops to just get some code out. It was a very small change. So why do these matter? Because all these represent our affinity for, our reliance on, or disdain for some or all of the trust rituals. They represent good and bad views of the rituals, reliance and confidence in them. And whether or not you agree, you should always care about what your team believes in and dislikes and relies on. One of the videos where they talk about trust says, trust can allow experimentation without penalty. So if your team knows that they can experiment, then they can disrupt. They're not worried about losing their jobs by making a mistake. They can maybe discover something new. Another way to phrase this is, if you've heard of psychological safety, Amy Edmonds is a psychologist who kind of coined this term, a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. At Shopify, we talk about something called the trust battery, which is a combination of trust, respect, reputation, etc. The idea is you build up trust, and it earns the ability to have people trust you, which means I can say, I got this, and people leave you alone. No one micromanaged you. Or you can say, I screwed up. And people are like, okay, it was a bad day. And then you get to move on. Those are really valuable when people feel they have that. All right, so we have one thing left. If the goal is to prevent trust violations, and we want to build it, these violations cost us trust and time, then our goal should be to build trust and save time. Well, earlier I mentioned that managers sort of act like defenders of trust, so if managers are going to defend trust, they need to defend time. If our tech leads were builders of trust, in order to do that, they need to spend time. So what does that look like? What does it mean to defend time? And none of these suggestions are guarantees, but they're things to consider for you and your team. First, address deficits. Do people trust the systems that you put in place regarding promotion, feedback goals? If you don't have those, everything else after this, all the rituals won't be effective. Then you need to get ritual buy-in. So, are the goals of these rituals understood? Do people know them? If they don't, then maybe you need to stop doing them. Or you need to teach people why we're doing these things. One practice I saw a manager do that I loved, which is that before every project sprint, main unit of work, they went through every ritual, stand-up, retro, planning. How often do we want to do this? Does the cadence before apply to the cadence now? And that's awesome, because sometimes people know the project coming up is gnarly. And we want to make sure that maybe an extra planning meeting a week for the first couple weeks is good. And then we'll switch it later when we know. Or maybe this is really easy work. We don't really need a lot of check-ins. Don't make us do these things. If people feel like they're being made to do something, they're not going to get anything out of them. Make sure you have useful meetings, but not in the way you think. I don't want everyone to just go in a blind rage and remove all meetings on the calendar, which happens sometimes. In fact, you likely can't decide this for yourself. In addition to assessing rituals, assess meetings. Are people getting out of them what is expected? Do people hate stand-up? You might need to educate, or you might need to drop it. And instead of saying, people complain about time, let's enforce some time minimums. If people don't have enough time to review PRs or pair, maybe your job is to create minimums. Everyone gets an hour a day, uninterrupted, unremovable, to review PRs. Now, that's easy for me to stand up here and say, and you might have deadlines, but maybe that's what's needed. So back to trust and time, if we have to ask ourselves, I think, 2 questions. Do people understand how something builds trust? And do they believe it saves more time in the end to do it? At Rubocop, do people understand why it builds trust to have a style linter? Do they get the value of consistent code? And more importantly, all the time that is saved by not bike shedding? Maybe that's worth explaining. As far as leads go, what about spending time? Managers are defending it. Sometimes that means taking the time to teach. And I don't mean to do the work or tell the work. I mean learn how to teach. Study pedagogy. What does it mean to teach someone? Everyone has different teaching styles. Maybe learn that for each individual team member. Teach people how to review PRs. Do people know how to look at a pull request? Trust no one. Now, what does this actually mean? You need to learn about what is not known. Trust no one when they say they understand something. You might need to ask people questions about what they know and if they consider, something that they know it better than they did before. Find the gaps. You can't fill them in, but you can find out the tools that are needed to do so. I think this is the new mantra, ohms and ohms. First ohm, it's the sound of the universe. It's peaceful, it's meditative, it's mindful. Be mindful and aware of how and why you do the things you do. Oops. And then other ohms. If you don't know the second one, in electricity, there's volts, amps, and ohms. Volts is how much water is coming through, like a hose. Amps would be the pressure, and ohms would be the size of the hose, the resistance. Slow down. Make sure that you understand, excuse me, when people are talking about service object on your team, does everyone in the room know what that is? Slow down. Ask questions. Make sure it is normal for everyone to ask questions, to ask the dumb question. Make it normal to be a little slower some days. So those are the goals. I hope we hit them all. So I'm over on time. Thank you for staying. Did you connect with this? Did you disagree? Let me know. Did it make you have any ohms or ohms? What were your biggest takeaways? I'm DeWyze at most things except Twitter. Some spam bot has at DeWyze. But if you have any questions, you can reach me on some of those things. Shopify is hiring. It's a place I love working. It's a place I trust working. If anybody wants to come, I'll be up here to talk. I don't think we have time for questions, but thank you and have a great RailsConf.